Scroll up. There we go. Thank you. How are you? Stop scrolling. Stop. Thank you. So we have a traffic issue of some kind. It's on 61. I don't know what caused it, but we got several of our people are not here because they're stuck in traffic. So we were kind of delaying a little bit tonight, but glad you made it, and you didn't have to go through all that mess. Hopefully they'll clear it up. Is it construction up there, or is it? It is a wreck. I'm sorry to hear that. All right. Well, hope everybody will be okay before they get here. We're in chapter 17 of our study in Leviticus. We looked at the Day of Atonement last week. We saw how all those sacrifices and those clean and unclean animals and conditions of man all contributed to the instruction that we read last week in chapter 16. But this evening we want to begin 17. Some have suggested that this is a whole nother section. I don't believe that's the case at all. It's just simply a continuation. It is written, you can see in the style in chapter 17, from the first verse and the last verse. It's written in what's typically called covenant language of this particular time in which Moses wrote it. And it began with the Lord, or Jehovah, declaring to Moses, speak to Aaron and to his sons and to all the children of Israel, and say to them, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded, saying. And so it just begins that way, and then it kind of ends in similar fashion. But again, we're announcing here, these instructions are coming from the Lord. And so then he begins in verse 3, whatever man of the house of Israel who kills an ox or lamb or goat in the camp, or who kills it outside the camp and does not bring it to the door of the tabernacle of meeting to offer an offering to the Lord before the tabernacle of the Lord, the guilt of bloodshed shall be imputed to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people, to the end that the children of Israel may bring their sacrifices, which they offer in the open field, that they may bring them to the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, to the priest, and offer them as peace offerings to the Lord. And the priest shall sprinkle the blood on the altar of the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and burn the fat for a sweet aroma to the Lord. They shall no more offer their sacrifices to demons, after whom they have played the harlot. This shall be a statute forever for them throughout their generations. Also, you shall say to them, whatever man of the house of Israel or of the strangers who dwell among you, who offers a burnt offering or sacrifice and does not bring it to the door of the tabernacle of meeting to offer it to the Lord, that man shall be cut off from among his people. And whatever man of the house of Israel or of the strangers who dwell among you, who eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood, and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, no one among you shall eat blood, nor shall any stranger who dwells among you eat blood. Whatever man of the children of Israel or of the strangers who dwell among you, who hunts and catches any animal or bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with dust. For it is the life of all flesh. By the way, before we go past verse 13, the King James is very obscure here. It's almost unintelligible what he means. What he's actually saying is they're wild animals, like deer or gazelle, other animals that are not considered livestock or raised domestic animals. So that's what he means in verse 13. Anyway, for if it is the life of all flesh, its blood sustains its life. Therefore, I said to the children of Israel, you shall not eat the blood of any flesh. For the life of all flesh is its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off. Every person who eats what died naturally or what was torn by beasts, whether he is a native of your own country or a stranger, he shall both wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening, then he shall be clean. But if he does not wash them or bathe his body, he shall bear his guilt. So here we have an interesting chapter, and at first glance you may wonder, why was God going to such pains to make sure that the children of Israel brought their offering or their animals that they were going to eat to the door of the tabernacle? Wouldn't that be kind of inconvenient to have to do that? It is interesting because in the book of Deuteronomy, when the 40 years of wandering was completed, there would be an update on this command. Because when Israel ultimately settled in the land of Canaan, as Moses was anticipating, when they settled in their various cities, it wouldn't be very easy to come back to Jerusalem every time to fix dinner. So you wouldn't do that. But if you're in the wilderness and you're camped around the tabernacle within its very site and vicinity, then that's where you bring your offering and you present it to the Lord. So what we have are just regulations regarding the killing and eating of certain meats. Now it's interesting to me because as he mentioned here, there are a couple of reasons that are mentioned that are obvious as to why this is to be done. First, if you're going to be offering it as a sacrifice, the blood needs to be sprinkled at my altar. That's the first thing. And so that a lot of emphasis on blood in this chapter, obviously. The second is the priests themselves, this is how they live. This is their livelihood. So you're going to provide meat for them, food for them, and we'll say more about that in a moment. But also there's contemplated in this the idea that people that just randomly offer their animal sacrifices wherever they happen to be may be tempted to offer those sacrifices to demons. Some versions say he-goats. I think the King James says devils. There's a number of ways to translate this, but clearly it was idolatry that was the concern. And Moses is here saying, do not offer your sacrifices just anywhere. Bring them to the door of the tabernacle. Offer the blood at the altar. And, of course, present what you could to the priest, so on and so forth. It kind of strikes me when, of course, again, the emphasis is God is regulating worship. He has always regulated worship. There's never been a time in the history of mankind when God said, hey, do the best you can, bring me what pleases you. Never. That's never happened. Instead, God has always given clear, detailed instruction about what he expects from those who would worship him. Now, in John 4, as we saw this past Lord's Day, in that interview with the woman at the well, Jesus said the Father is seeking true worshipers who will worship him in what way? In spirit and in truth. Now let's bring this up to date. God is here telling Israel, especially while they're traveling through the wilderness, that whenever you kill one of these domesticated animals, you bring it to the door of the tabernacle meeting, and there you'll make an appropriate offering, and of course you'll eat whatever is yours, and the priest will get what's theirs, and et cetera, et cetera. All those are broken down. But today, we're not told a particular place to worship. Or are we? And let's think about this for a minute. And again, John chapter 4, the woman that Jesus was interviewing was referring back to those Samaritans of hers who said that our Samaritans say that we worship at Mount Gerizim. And you Jews say Jerusalem is the place we ought to worship. And Jesus responded by saying, the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will not be worshiping in a particular place. So that's not going to be an issue anymore. Or is it? Did the Lord mean that, we can just worship whenever? Well, let me put it to you this way. For many years, I heard a number of wayward brethren say to me, well, I can worship God better on the lake than I can in the church building on Sunday morning. Those crying babies. Because I feel closer to God in nature. Or in the deer stand. Or on the golf course. or watching Netflix. I mean, I just feel more in tune with God than being at church, with God's people. Now we have services broadcast on YouTube. I mean, you can find it in a number of places. And so people can just tune in and just sit at home in their underwear or whatever. They can dress up, I suppose they want to, but they can just worship there at home. And they say, well, I don't have to go to church because I can watch it on TV. Now, before you scream at me and start throwing songbooks at me, I want to just make this observation that it is a wonderful thing that we have provided for us. This YouTube, all this ability to broadcast is a godsend. No question about that. But like anything else God gives us and provides for us, it can be abused and misused. And unfortunately, I think many people are doing that. Remember when COVID hit and we were told, our governor said, you can't assemble. We should have been here, but we can't assemble. Well, what do? We watched on TV at home. I was here, and Robert Wood was here. Sometimes Robert Moore, and you were here too, yeah. You remember those? Those were fun days, weren't they? And I got to scream at them, just the two of them. And of course, that's who I'm usually preaching anyway. But so they were both here, so I had my audience. And after COVID, most of us came back. A lot of us didn't. A lot of us decided, I don't have to be there. I can just stay at home and do what I... But when you look at everything the New Testament says about church, now we use that term, the New Testament uses it in a sense broadly. We use it far more broadly. But when we say church, we typically, instantly in your brain, some picture of a building popped in your head, probably. Or maybe pews, or this, or something about the church buildings stuck in your head, because that's just how our brains work and we process things. When I say church, that's what you think. And church really does involve those things, because 1 Corinthians 14, for example, when you come together into one place, what does that mean? What is he talking about? Talking about a worship assembly. Or in 1 Corinthians 11, when he talks about, when you come together, it's not possible to... Well, when did they come together? Well, chapter 16, on the first day of the week, they gave their offering, but they also partook of the Lord's Supper. And so these things happened at a particular time, and in their particular situation, a particular place. And so it is with us. We are members of this congregation. Does it not follow that if God was telling the people of Israel, you can't just worship anywhere you choose, you got to come here to worship? Why would he be unconcerned today about us just staying at home and watching on television? We need to get out and assemble, do we not? In fact, Hebrews 10:25 says, not what? The assembling. So assembling means coming together. We're coming together as a group. And we do that on the first day of the week in particular, because that's the day that God has designated for us to worship. Again, in every age, in every dispensation, God has designated how we are to worship. And on the old law, where, and even in a sense, today, where. And I think I've described that sense for you just now. Again, all animals used for sacrifice were to be slain at the tent of meeting. And again, of course, the blood was sprinkled around the altar. People were hungry. They're eating. There's a lot of families. There's a lot of blood. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, God's saying it's got a bottleneck right here. You're going to come to the door. I mean, these priests had to be worn out. I hope there was never an August like this over there when they're having to slay all those animals and skin them. I mean, it got hot today. And I mean, wow. It's a lot of work to process an animal like this. And they're doing this over and over and over and over again. Again, part of their duty. His blood was again sprinkled at the altar, captured and sprinkled there. God again chose, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I didn't keep up my slide. But anyway, God has chosen a place of worship. Now, in Deuteronomy 12, I do want to touch on that very quickly. Please hold your finger here and turn with me to Deuteronomy 12, because we have some supplementary teaching on this issue. In fact, Moses kind of changes somewhat, or modifies, I should say, the law, contemplating, again, their settling in their various territories in cities. It wouldn't be feasible every time you wanted to eat to go to Jerusalem. You couldn't. I mean, they're walking most of the time, so it wouldn't be possible. But again, if you look at Deuteronomy 12, let's see what verse 1. Okay, let's look at this, verse 1. These are the statutes and judgments which you shall be careful to observe in the land which the Lord God of your fathers is giving you to possess, all the days that you live on the earth. You shall utterly destroy all the places where the nation which you shall dispossess served their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. And you shall destroy their altar, break their sacred pillars, and burn their wooden images with fire. You shall cut down the carved images of their gods and destroy their name from that place. You shall not worship the Lord your God with such things. But you shall seek the place where the Lord your God chooses. Now, before we continue reading here, when Israel did eventually settle the land of Canaan under Joshua's leadership, where was the place of worship? Now, where was the place that God chose? Shiloh. They were at Shiloh for 300 years. That's a long time. That's 3 centuries at least that the worship was designated to take place, and that's where the tabernacle was. That's where the articles of furniture were during that entire period of the Judges. All that we read up to the time of 1 Samuel, we're actually at Shiloh. It wasn't until the days of David when he brought back the articles of furniture and made a place around the city of Jerusalem, and ultimately then his son Solomon would build a house for God, as though God needed a house. But again, that was the course of things. But Shiloh was the place of worship. And Jeremiah, talked about that quite a bit in his prophecy. He said, as I've done to Shiloh, I will do to this place. And so he's referencing a time when God had ordered worship to take place there. And then he took it away. But that was God's choice. And again, it lasted for quite a while. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, verse 6 of chapter 12, and your tithes, your heave offerings, etc., etc. All this shall be done, and you will not do after the abomination of those nations that you're driving out. Again, I mentioned John chapter 4. I'm losing my stick. John chapter 4. And we won't read these chapters, all of them, but I would like for you to consult this when you get home, perhaps. But that whole exchange between Jesus and the woman at the well and his discussion about the place of worship. Now, I mentioned that passage a moment ago in the King James, so we're not to offer these sacrifices to demons. Other version would read this way: they should no longer offer sacrifices to the goat-like demons. Again, some translations say he-goat, which it's hard to translate. What does it mean? Well, I think the translator finally leveled on the fact that we're talking about devils or idol worship, and that's what this is really about. And in doing this, they were spiritually prostituting themselves. They were playing the harlot, as the King James says. And God says, you're not going to do that. So, something I was struck with back in the late 80s, no, the middle 80s actually, 84, 85. I was attending a congregation in Montgomery, Alabama, and there was an announcement made that starting next week, we're going to start having house churches. And I thought, what is that? What is a house church? And what it meant was, on Sunday nights, rather than coming to the church building and assembling, as everyone was in the custom of doing at that time, we're going to instead have different families hosting different segments, cliques, if you will, of the church in their home. And there will be several of them spread out because it's a rather large congregation. And I remember immediately when we dismissed that night, several of the brethren standing around talking, well, how is that going to work if the elders are not there to oversee what's happening? I mean, there's all kind of, mischief that could take place in a situation like that. I remember as a young man thinking, yes, but people are not going to do that. I was idealistic. And I thought, people are not going to do it. Yeah, people will do that. That's what they'll do because they're not there and they're not being watched. And so they'll bring in instruments of music or female preachers or whatever they want to do, whatever the digressive thing is at the moment, they'll bring it in and they'll say, well, here we're going to do this because no one's here to oversee it or to stop it or to say otherwise. That was really foolhardy when you think about it. And again, it's the same principle here. God's saying, I want you to come here to the tabernacle. This is where you worship. You don't just worship anywhere. You don't just follow the dictates of your heart. You come here, and that way the worship will remain pure and, of course, directed to God. Now, the Levites were to be provided with these sacrifices. Again, in Deuteronomy 18, Moses reminded Israel, the Levitical priest, indeed the whole tribe of Levi, shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. They are to eat the offering made by fire to the Lord. That is their inheritance. They didn't have land. They weren't given a possession. What they did have was the free will offerings of the people as they brought their sacrifices. That's how they lived. And so the priests were to be taken care of. They were to be monetarily provided for. In that sense, is how we would understand it. And no doubt in some instances were monetarily supplemented for their work as priests as they led the congregation in worship. Again, the emphasis here on blood in this chapter is really profound. We've talked about this in previous lessons, so I won't spend a lot of time here. But there's a great deal of respect that God says we're to have for blood, regard for blood. And he gives us the reason. And what is the reason? Why is blood so important? Because that's where your life is. Without blood, you don't live. So if you bleed out, then you're dead. And so the life of the animal, be it human or whatever other creature, the life of that particular creature is in its blood. And so to take blood is the equivalent of taking their life. But again, notice how God is putting this stamp, if you will, on the sacredness of life. And it's a principle that really is, we think about it as it relates to the scheme of redemption, and it does. I mean, directly, that's what it's about. But indirectly, it's more than just that. It's also, God respects life. All life. Animal life. Human life. Again, we'll say more about that in a moment. In Genesis 9, verse 4, when Noah got off the ark with his 3 sons and their wives, God said that he had given all the animals to mankind now for food, just like he had the green herbs. Now he's giving them the animals to eat as well. I'm glad, because I like meat and I enjoy eating meat. But again, he gave us meat to eat. But notice what he said don't do to Noah. He said to Noah and the human race, by extension, the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat. Genesis 9, verse 4. So again, notice that the flesh and the blood and the life, all these things are tied together. This was under the law that God gave to Noah in that covenant with mankind. And we have it here in Leviticus 17 under the law of Moses. But in Acts 15, remember when they were discussing the question about whether or not Gentile converts should be required to be circumcised to have full fellowship in the church? After much discussion, they decided, no, we can't require that, but we can require these things. And among the things they required, isn't it interesting? Drinking blood, or things strangled, or things offered to idols. The same thing that we're reading here in Leviticus 17, the same principle. God still holds life to be sacred. All life is sacred. People with whom we disagree are sacred. People that live lives we find disgusting, their life is sacred. And we'll have to say more about that in a moment, but I just want you to look at it from this general standpoint. Why is God saying this? Again, we understand about the scheme of redemption. We've talked about this every time. All of this points to ultimately the life of the Son of God who freely gave himself, of course, for our sins so that we can be saved from the wrath of God through him. Life itself is precious. You know, even the wild animals, those that were killed in the field, not the domesticated ones that had to come to the tabernacle, but you could kill animals out in the field, the wild animals, say a deer or a rabbit or whatever, you could kill that and you could eat it. But when you killed it, you couldn't eat its blood, you couldn't drink its blood, you couldn't eat it raw, you had to cook it. But what did you do with the blood? Well, Moses tells us, you bury it in the dirt. Even an animal, when you bleed that animal, you cover that blood. Why? You think God cares about animals? Let me ask you that. Does God care about animals? He made them, right? When Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount and he talked about, we think about us being benefited by God's blessings, and we are. But Jesus illustrated by saying the birds of the air, they don't sow, they don't toil, they don't gather in the barns, and yet your Heavenly Father feeds them. And not one of them dies or falls to the ground without his noticing it. But then he goes on to add, are you not much more valuable? I think that's the problem we're having today, is in an increasingly godless society that thinks in terms of, we're just going to live our life without God being even part of the equation. That animal life has not only seen an elevation, it's actually above mankind. We're honoring animals more than men. So you can kill your baby in the womb because it's your body, your choice. But if you take an eagle egg and you know how they're going to charge you? They'll throw you in jail. They're not messing around. Even rodents out in the Midwest. You can't do certain things with your own property because you might tamper with their habitat. So rats have more rights than human beings. That's absurd. And that's what happens when we lose sight of reality, actually. We lose common sense. Well, we become foolish. Romans 1, we become foolish because we've rejected the knowledge of God. We think we're smart. We think we're wise. And really, we're just stupid. We're foolish. And we see that everywhere. Wild animals, again, we're also to be cared for. Look at the birds of the air. They don't sow, gather in the barns, yet your Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? So the one who made all creatures said that human beings are more valuable than animals. And the one who made all creatures said to worship me under the law, even under the patriarchal system, animals are to be slain. We need to keep things in perspective and not lose sight of reality. Any question about chapter 17?
There's such a thing as private worship and corporate worship. You're talking about what we do in corporate worship.
Yes. When we assemble, when we come together. So we're members here. We could be members somewhere else, but we're members here. And whenever we have membership in a particular place, that's where we worship. And that is our place of worship in that sense on certain occasions when we come together. The idea, that's what troubles me, is we've taken a valuable tool that's available to us today, the internet, and we're using it as a crutch for apostasy, in my opinion. We're not going to do what God said. We're not going to assemble. We're going to just stay at home and watch it on TV. It's convenient to do that, isn't it? It's convenient to just kill your sheep and eat it right there in your backyard without having to take it to the priest and have him throw blood around the altar and bless it and give your part to the priest. It's just easier to do it in your backyard, of course. But God said don't do that. That was under the law. And he said, but we don't have a particular place to worship. Well, we do, in a sense, have a particular place to worship. That is wherever the congregation I'm a member of assembles. That's where I need to be on the Lord's Day. That's where I need to worship. So again, that sense, I think, does make sense. Put it that way. Okay, chapter 18. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. According to the doings of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, you shall not do. And according to the doings of the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you, you shall not do. Nor shall you walk in their ordinances. You shall observe my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. Now, before we continue with this section, I want to just say again something I've mentioned before. I'm just going to keep harping on this. The lie that humanity has been sold by Satan. Doing what God tells me to do somehow shackles me, somehow holds me back, somehow hinders me from enjoying my life. That is a lie. The abundant life is enjoyed in Christ, period. Faithfully following the Lord, doing as he said. Well, people say, well, yeah, but he's really strict about certain things. Well, maybe. It just depends on what you mean by strict or how you define strict. We all have codes of conduct. Some are different, some are, from others. We tend, as God's people, to follow his teaching. Why? Because we know it's not just that we're doing what God expects. We know that by doing it, we're profited. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable. It benefits us. We're aided. We're blessed in life. The happiest people are the people that are doing what God tells them to do, even though they may be suffering. I think I'm weird. I was listening to Martin Luther King's last sermon. It was that mountaintop sermon right before he was shot. And, of course, he was, trying to preach to those poor garbage workers in Memphis that were, not being treated right, and they were on strike. It was a powerful, stirring speech. He was a great orator. We've all heard the things that he had to say. But it really struck me. I thought, here this man is preaching this message of acceptance and treating everyone equally, which is a valid point to make. But why? Because we're all human beings, and we're all created in the image of God, and we all deserve dignity and to be treated properly. But again, it's the best life. It's the happiest life. You could go to jail, and he did. He went to jail. And I know people, I lived there during that period of time. You lived in that period of time, many of you. And there was this perception, and probably with some merit, I don't know how much merit there was, that maybe he was a little bit of an agitator. I don't think so. I think he did what he felt like he had to do under the circumstance. Something's got to be done. Something's got to be said. And it really an interesting part of that sermon where he's calling on fellow preachers to stop being so complacent. We talk about, the streets flowing with milk and honey. We need to talk about the people right here in Memphis that are suffering and can't feed their families. I thought, that's getting down in the trenches kind of preaching, when you stop preaching and go to meddling kind of thing. But he was encouraging preachers to go to meddling. I thought, well, that's good. That's helpful because under the circumstances, that was what was needed. But even when they're suffering, he said, we were singing. When we were in jail, these guys, these white prison keepers, they were watching us, and they were impressed with our prayers, with our songs. And I thought, it's amazing, isn't it? How can people do that except people that are guided by Christian principles and ideals, that have a God-like view of the world? We see the world through that prism. And so even though we're suffering and people are mistreating us, we can still enjoy it. Paul and Silas sang in prison after they've been beaten and they're shackled and it's midnight and they're singing praises to God, converting people. It's really sad that we've allowed Satan to convince us. If I just follow the Bible, I won't be able to live a happy, fulfilled life. People that are living the way they, quote, unquote, want to live are miserable people. Maybe not today. Maybe, going to the club this week, I had a great time. Yeah, I want to go back next week. Okay, do that for a while, but then in a few years, when you sober up and you wake up, where are you? And what have you accomplished in your life? And who's there to help you in your life when you're left alone, by yourself? It really is a sad thing when you consider the choices that people make. Because I believe if I just do my thing, I'll be happy. That's a lie. And again, before we even begin this section, God said, I'm telling you to do this because I want you to live. God's not mean. He's not holding us back. He's trying to help us. He made us. He designed us. And he's telling us this is the way you should live. So verse 6, none of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him, even in Alabama, to uncover his nakedness. I am the Lord. I'm sorry. Do we have any people from Alabama here tonight? I am the Lord. The nakedness of your father or the nakedness of your mother you shall not. This is an interesting expression the King James provided us. It literally means have sex with these people. So she is your mother, you shall not uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of your father's wife, you shall not uncover. It is your father's nakedness. The nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father, or the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or elsewhere, their nakedness you shall not uncover. The nakedness of your son's daughter, or your daughter's daughter, their nakedness you shall not uncover. For theirs is your own nakedness. They're your flesh and blood. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter. begotten by your father, she is your sister. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is near of kin to your father. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is near of kin to your mother. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, nor shall you take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are near kin to her. It is wickedness. Nor shall you take a woman as a rival to her sister to uncover her nakedness while the other is alive. Also, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness as long as she is in her customary impurity. Moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her, and you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. Nor shall you mate with any animal to defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is perversion. Do not defile yourself with any of these things, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. For the land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, shall not commit any of these abominations, either any of your own nation or any stranger who dwells among you. For all these abominations the men of the land have done who were before you, and thus the land is defiled. Lest the land vomit you out also when you defile it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever commits any of these abominations, the persons who commit them shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore you shall keep my ordinance, so that you do not commit any of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that you do not defile yourself by them. I am the Lord your God. So he covers a lot of territory here. I know when I was reading that about the next of kin, you're probably thinking, I know Abraham, Isaac. I get it. I mean, there was a time. By the way, I want to just say this about, before we get too much into this. I was asked a question one time with someone who was a Methodist preacher who didn't believe in God, apparently. And his daughter didn't believe in God, didn't believe in the Bible. Certainly didn't believe the Bible, but captiously asked me on one occasion, you think Adam and Eve's children had relation with each other? Yeah, they still are. They're not near kin, but they still are. There was a time when, yeah. So what's your solution? These primates that crawl out of the mud, they form male and female. That's interesting. That's a feat in and of itself. But they also form not just one group, but another group. So it's just ridiculous. I mean, either way you look at it, we started somewhere and we had to move. So over time, things progressed and God laid down a new law. So Abraham was married to his half-sister. And that wasn't uncommon at that time. And they had multiple wives. I mean, they did a lot of things that God here calls wickedness now. Again, there's a lot of reason for that, I'm sure. So again, if you look at all this couched in this statement, don't behave like the Egyptians did. Don't behave like the Canaanites that you're about to drive out. Don't be like them. Don't follow them. Do not conform to them. We're told the same thing, by the way. In Romans 12, we're not to conform to the pattern of this world. Give me an example of something that's going on today, a thought, an idea that's prevalent, that a lot of people are buying into and reflects a disobedience to this command. Anything come to mind? Anything at all? Homosexuality, one of them, okay. Who? Oil change? What did you say? Oil change? Yeah, that can be simple too. I mean, they charge you like rip for that. What's that now?
Climate change.
Oh, climate change. Oh, okay. Huh? Gender fluidity. Well, now it's the point where, if you don't go along with the crowd, then you're a bad person, you're mean or whatever. I mean, that's nothing new. But again, we have to be careful what we hear and how it affects us or impacts our mind. Now, in 1 Corinthians 8 through 10, it's a lengthy discussion. We're not going to have time to read it. I wish we did. I encourage you to read it. But it would seem, if you look at these 3 chapters as a unit, and you really must, because they are a unit, it's an interesting thought that Paul develops very carefully as he crafts this argument. And it kind of climaxes in chapter 10, verse 12, which, therefore, let him that thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. But he starts in chapter 8, contemplating individuals in the church, Christians, that were arguing, it would seem, that we can go to the temple of idols and participate in what's going on there. And because we know better, because we're smarter, because we know that these demons, these idols that they're worshiping, they don't mean anything. They're just meaningless gestures. So we can go there and it doesn't. But then Paul says, kind of in a gingerly kind of way, yeah, but what about the weaker brother in the church who sees you go there? You strong brother, you're going there, and he sees you doing that. And so he might be emboldened to think, well, I guess it's okay for a Christian to do that. So he's going to continue to do it, worshiping demons. And you can't do that, Paul argues. But I think chapter 8, if it's read in and of itself and left standing by itself, doesn't finish his thought. He doesn't leave us hanging there. I think he finishes the thought in verse 12 of chapter 10. And then he also says in chapter 10, flee idolatry. Don't toy with it. But what's he trying to say? He's actually saying to those smug, self-righteous individuals at Corinth that thought they were so strong, we can go there, we can participate in it, and it won't affect me. All of us, I don't care who we are, at what stage we are in our Christian walk. If we're not careful who we allow to influence us, who we allow to entertain us, if we're not careful what we see, what we hear, or who we associate with, that's really the stronger. We always talk about young people and how young people need to learn to overcome peer pressure. Well, maybe they will once we figure out how to overcome peer pressure. And the best way to overcome it is don't involve yourself with the wrong kind of people. Don't you know that evil communications corrupt good morals? That's, again, all that's here in 1 Corinthians, but Paul is very careful. It's really an interesting argument that he makes. But you kind of see him kind of working them through this process all the way up to chapter 10. I may have the right to do certain things he said in chapter 9, but then you get to chapter 10, I'm not going to do it. Why? Because I might do it, even though I think I'm strong enough to do it, but ultimately, it's going to destroy me. I can't allow myself to be influenced. So God is warning Israel. You've just left Egypt. Don't do what you did there. Don't do what Aaron just led you to do. The absurdity of dancing around a golden calf. Don't do that. And when you come into Canaan, don't burn your children to Molech. That's what he's saying in this chapter. Anyway, I saw a video this morning. I'm kind of disturbed. Even now, YouTube video, man was talking about an archaeologist. Well, I'll get to that in a minute, if we get time. Why did God command the invasion of Canaan in the book of Joshua? Why did God give the land to the Jews? He promised it, yeah. It was judgment. These were his avenging angels. They were sent to destroy these people. Remember what God said to Abraham 400 years before. He said, your people are going to go and they're sojourn 400 years in Egypt. Then they're going to be set free. And the reason there's going to be a 400-year reprieve is because the sin of the Amorite is not yet full. There's going to come a time when the land is so polluted by their unbelievable behavior that it will vomit them out. And you're going to be there to mop it up. That's literally, almost following the figure of speech, that's what they were to do. They were to come in and destroy men, women, children, everything. Don't leave them alive. You utterly decimate these cultures because they have so corrupted themselves. This was God's arm of judgment. Again, we see the same thing in Deuteronomy 29. Now, incest is certainly considered here, and that's wrong. You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Molech. By the way, you see this depiction here of these red or orange hens. That's by design because they were hollow and they were heated up with fire, and living babies were put onto these hens and they were roasted and burned alive. In order to do this, they had to have music and drums. It was something like you'd see on that Indiana Jones Temple of Doom thing. It was really horrific stuff. And this was happening in the land. By the way, in 1902, this was the video I was watching. And it wasn't from 1902, but it was somebody who was discussing Stuart McAllister and the discoveries he made in Gesher, not far from Jerusalem. And these are pillars that were dug up. And around each of these pillars, there were little jars with baby bones, and they were clearly burned. And there was also the skeletal remains of a 6 or 7-year-old girl that had been sawed in half. I mean, this was the Amorites worshiping on the high places. This is what they were doing. And God is saying, don't do that. Eventually, they did do that. By the way, we studied Manasseh this last Sunday. You know what Manasseh did? He filled Jerusalem with blood. He even offered his own sons to Molech. So they actually became worse than the nations that were driven out before them. This is horrible. Of course, homosexuality is included here. You know, Romans, we're all familiar with this passage, Romans 1:18. There's one that I want to really draw your attention to, and that's verse 32, the end verse of this chapter. When he lists a number of sins, not just homosexuality, it's all kind of sins, it's a catalog of sins. All of them, of course, are equally guilty. But at the end of that list, he said, they not only do them, this is people that acknowledge that God had decreed they're wrong. They know that it's wrong, but they do them anyway. But they also give approval. Now, that's an interesting phrase, again, in the King James, but the idea is they're trumpeting, they're heralding, they're encouraging this kind of behavior. And so it's not just people that practice it, it's people that say we should accept those who practice it. If you're doing that, well, then the wrath of God abides on you. By the way, I'm going to cover this before we close. This is actually a depiction of a woman in England who married her dog on live TV. And she said she preferred a dog over a man. But, you know, again, this is pretty common. You may think it's not, but even in this country, there are people that practice bestiality. I mentioned that before. It is perversion. And so, again, God said, don't do that. If you defile the land, it will vomit you out as it did the nation before you. God's no respecter of persons. And even though he brought these people in the land of Canaan as his avenging army to render judgment, the fact of the matter is, if they were to follow suit and do the same thing, God would vomit them out as well. They would be punished equally. I wonder about our country. If we say God judged Rome and ancient Rome for all of their perversion, what about modern America? France, England, Spain, Germany. I mean, Europe is just gone. I mean, we're practically in the same boat with them. We're gone too. It's really sad, isn't it, that we've reached this point. Any questions or comments before I forget to announce that children have already come in the auditorium? Oh, we started a little bit late tonight, by the way. Remember? Thank you, dear. Robert, where's Robert? Y'all be careful. I'm sorry you got stuck in traffic. You weren't the only ones. Well, somebody else has a birthday today. Yeah. Cindy Lou who? Yeah. Do what? The hair? Yes, ma'am. Sharon, by the way, is having a birthday today. And which one of your kids? Both of them.
They have similar birthdays.
I forgot. On Saturday then, you said?
This is Saturday, this is Wednesday.
Okay. Well, happy birthday to all of them. So, Jonathan, would you make sure we sing happy birthday to these, please? Thank you. Is Robert in here yet? Oh, that one. There you are. Yeah, which one's a good question. So your song of invitation, 840. Don't forget the ladies are having a Bible study the 9th at 10 a.m. this week. Also, the Friday night fellowship, which is night after tomorrow night. What time? We start at 6. Bring finger foods and games. Then there's a ladies' day at Lithia Springs, August the 10th. Registration begins at 8:30. Program begins at 9. Sally Wallace from the Fayetteville Church will be speaking. There's a work day planned here for the 17th. There's going to be a church work day here starting at 9 a.m. That's when we normally have our men's fellowship, breakfast, and what have you. We're going to forego that and instead have the work day. And then I think, Adam, are you going to be feeding us? Okay, Adam's going to be cooking, and Angela's going to be fixing everything for us to eat, right? Is that something like that? All right, I'm sure y'all have help. But anyway, we're so thankful for Nathan and his decision to put the Lord on in baptism this past Lord's Day. He did a great job leading the prayer tonight, by the way. And, you know, these young men that lead in our worship from time to time, and we need to be using them as much as we can to encourage them. They're young men, and it's nerve-wracking to get up in front of an audience of people and lead a prayer or lead a song. And I'm really proud of these young men. And we have a good group, and I want us to all please encourage them. Sharon, you're having a birthday today. You're turning 23, right? And then we have the Sequins birthdays, both of them Saturday. You're going to celebrate Saturday? Miles, good to see you. Would you please stand for a minute? We talked about you Sunday, but this is Brother Miles, Rachley, and Racely. I'm sorry, man, I get it right. I'm sorry, Racely. I said that right. Okay, so he's one of us now, and we're thankful to have him in our area. Okay, Kathy, Bednar, AJ, and Alan were in a car wreck day before yesterday, wasn't it? Or was it yesterday? It was Monday, yeah. They got T-boned, but they're okay, but Kathy's at home kind of beat up and sore, but certainly want to remember them in our prayers. Chris is traveling home as we speak, right? Not yet?
He leaves at like 5:30 in the morning here.
Okay, so it takes a while to get home from that side of the world. But anyway, remember Chris. Michael Mullins is in Paulding County Hospital, apparently has congestive heart failure. Robert Wood's friend, where's he at? He did lose his wife. Where's Robert? Is he still here? He left. Anyway, sorry to hear that. Several people are still sick and fighting a lot of whatever this is going around this time of year. We're thankful to be here tonight, and the Lord's been good to us, blessed us with this opportunity. It was good to see one added to the Lord this last Lord's Day, one added to the Lord last Thursday. There may be others. And again, I want to remind you, everything's ready, everything's prepared. If you need to obey the gospel and you know what the Lord would have you to do, while we sing this song of invitation, it is a convenient time for you to respond. And we certainly encourage you to do that. Or if you need prayers, if we can assist you in any way, please make that need known while together we stand as we sing.
Hark, the gentle voice of Jesus calleth tenderly upon your ear. Sweet his cry of love and pity calleth. Turn and listen, say and hear. Ye that labor and are heavy laden, lean upon your dear Lord's rest. Ye
heads, please. Dear Father, thank you for all my blessings. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for everything. Please help everyone to be safe when they go home tonight. Thank you for everything else. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.